Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today, if you have read the description for today's live stream, then you know, at least in a tertiary manner, that today's live stream is really going to be addressing this information aspect of this channel, and in particular its live streams. And I hope that by sharing with you what I have to share today, we will be able to uncover together some hidden truths about the obstacles we face on the path. Truths that are largely overlooked if people even are aware of them, if they even know about them. And perhaps it's not even that they're overlooked, but perhaps they're being swept under the table, under the carpet entirely. They're truths that are deliberately obscured, truths that are not talked about, as though they were taboo subjects. And indeed, you may find it difficult to delve into some of the topics that I was forced to delve into this past week. And when I say forced is perhaps a strong word. Strongly encouraged to delve into as a result of my experiences over the last roughly 10 days. And all of this can be traced back to how a number of weeks ago I began waking up at 3 and 4 in the morning, as I often do. But as opposed to simply meditating at that hour and maybe going back to sleep for an hour or so, I was being awoken and not even being permitted to meditate, because my mind was receiving already, and I was being instructed that I needed to capture in presentation format, in video format, in written format, that which I was receiving. That I basically awoke in a meditative state and I was receiving, and this is a pattern which I have experienced on and off over the past decade. But in particular, this was my routine easily for 6 months straight, while last year, as I was working on the Human 3.0 upgrade video and that campaign video, and in the prior year, this was my routine for very nearly a year as I was writing the book, What in Hell is With Us? It's my work routine, as it were, to go to sleep sometime between 9 and 10, and wake up, or more aptly put, be woken up anywhere between 3 and 5 a.m. to get anywhere between 3 to 5 hours of work in before breakfast. Because that, for me at least, is the most productive time of day. And as I have often shared with you, it is for me the most auspicious time to do spiritual work. So my early morning meditations between 3 and 6 a.m. And indeed, when I have the good grace and privilege and blessings to be working with a spouse, then between 3 and 6 a.m. is also, I find, the most auspicious time of day to practice white tantra, or to practice pranayama, or mantra, or the rites of rejuvenation, or any spiritual practice. Now, that period of time, the 3 to 6 a.m., is known as the witching hour. And it is a well-known fact. It's an experience that many have, that they are awoken during that hour and they find it the most auspicious, advantageous, productive time to perform spiritual work. And so it only makes sense for someone in my position doing the work that I'm here to do, that I would be most effective at that work at those hours, early morning, right around the time that the sun is rising, or just before the sun is rising, depending on the time of year. So a few weeks ago, the pattern returned, and I was being woken up and being given work to do, which I was doing. And this work seemed to be focusing on what I was calling the hashtag human upgrade challenge. And this was happening in conjunction with other circumstances related to Atlas Conscious Arts and the Attlas project, and basically my life's work. Other circumstances were revealing themselves to me. I was being made aware of changing circumstances, economically, scientifically, geopolitically, in which it became clear that the environment was beginning to shift, and that the world and the movers and shakers of that world were beginning to likewise shift in their perceptions of things, and their awareness of what really matters and what they are in desperate need of. And there's beginning to be an alignment between that which I am here to offer and that which the movers and shakers are slowly beginning to awaken to, what is really important and what they really need. And as those alignments converge, that was all being made clear to me in the few weeks prior to today. And as part of that was this human upgrade challenge, a way to involve people in this process of discovery, and in this, instead of just making explainer videos that just give the information or tell the story or whatever, as visual as they are, and at times symbolic or allegorical, or using whatever methodologies were available to me to communicate what needed to be communicated, the Human Upgrade Challenge hashtag was an attempt at involving others and making it an active, interactive process, whereby each week I would deliver a challenge and give people a week to try to work it out for themselves. And then on this live stream, we would talk about what had come to them, what they had come up with, and then reveal the answer to the challenge, and then take it to the next level and propose a new challenge for next week that would build on the previous week's challenge, and that we would progress in this way. And of course, last week, we did just that. And I even gave a new challenge for the week and said that hopefully I will have time to make a video and make it official and everything else. But of course, I didn't have the time or ability to do that. And it was because what happened in between all of this information coming to me and this Human Upgrade Challenge and all of the excitement and enthusiasm around this new initiative, what happened in between, or right at the start of it, was the arrival of some family from overseas, and additionally family from the US. And all of a sudden, this new initiative, this new enterprise, this new project, which had barely been given a chance to get off the ground, but had burst out of the starting gates with a fairly provocative, fairly bold statement, right? I want to know God's thoughts, right? God's thoughts on creation, God's thoughts on 11:11. And we burst out of the starting gates. And then something came and cut it off. We burst out of the starting gates right into a brick wall. And it brought everything to a halt. Now, in all fairness, last week I was able to get away for 2 hours to do the live stream. But immediately, once the live stream was over, I was back into my family commitments and my obligations to my family and the guests that we had from Europe, and all of the responsibilities there too. And those responsibilities were not only of a material nature, i.e. time and energy. That drain on energy and the presence that it required of me really just, I had nothing left in the tank to devote to the project, to my work, to the Human Upgrade Challenge. And in addition, we had an abundance of food all the time, and not necessarily the best kind of food. And so I was no longer able to maintain my lifestyle routine, my typical lifestyle routine for health and vitality and energy. And suffice it to say, this all began weighing very, very heavily on me, and I ended up kind of imploding in as what I have suffered from often in the past, but not for a while now, but it came back with a vengeance, and that was a full-blown clinical depression. And as a part of that, as I've, this live stream today is an attempt to share with you the metaphysical, scientific, psychological process by which my life's work, which is supposed to be completely in the service of Attlas, the Christ, and thus for the service of the sake of all beings, for the sake of the end of suffering of all beings, for the sake of humanity. It is a work of suffering and sacrifice for humanity, as all who walk the path of the Bodhisattva have accepted that life, that whatever the eccentricities and particularities and details of their particular life's work, it doesn't matter. What is universal to the path of the Bodhisattva is suffering and sacrifice for others. For the sake of Christ, for the glory and the majesty of Christ. And with only a few days and a few circumstances of things getting in the way of that, the adversary that I live with, which is, as you know, is a powerful demon of fear and control that's responsible for epilepsy, for depression, for most of what I suffer from psychologically and neuropsychologically, and obviously physically as well, because epilepsy has that dimension to it, and so does depression have that dimension to it. The complete draining of energy and the lack of motivation, the having the inability to perform physically because of the way in which you're completely drained of energy. It has a very powerful physical dimension to it. But there was a real problem. There was a real disconnect. That was a real wake-up call. And showed me something that was very difficult to see. But it held a mirror up to me that I could not ignore. And when I stared into that mirror, believing that I was a bodhisattva staring into that mirror, all I saw in the reflection was the demon, the adversary, the false self, staring back at me. That's what this whole episode revealed. And it's so important for me to share this with you because, as I said, we do not hear this enough. people talk about the spiritual path, people talk about awakening and enlightenment and ascension, and they use all these words, but very rarely does anybody actually talk about the adversary. Why not? Why don't they? Or if they do, they talk about shadow work and integration of the shadow, and somehow integrating all of these negative traits, these egos, these negative emotions and everything, and taming them or training them or integrating them and using them in some way. And their understanding of that is so flawed, and it's just another form of entrapment. It's just another clever manipulation by the adversary. And what do I mean by the adversary? Our individual shaitan, our individual Satan, the singular amalgamation of all of our egos: fear, pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, laziness, that constitutes the false self, the I, and all of the desires of that I, which of course are these individual algorithms, these individual egos expressing themselves as they sit upon the iron throne of our internal psychological Game of Thrones. Because they all are fighting to get onto the iron throne. Game of Thrones is becoming more and more an anachronistic allegory every week, but nonetheless, that's the reason why it was so popular and the reason why it resonated with so many, because it was such a perfect allegory. Westeros and the competing houses was such a perfect allegory for the game of King of the Hill that plays out in our psyche between the competing elements of our adversary, because our adversary is at war with itself all the time. And you need only observe yourself to know that. And that's all well and good. And we've covered that many times. And even people, New Agers or whoever, that even they can acknowledge that there's a false self and a higher self, and the higher self is preferable to the false self, and yada, yada, yada. But what I am here to reveal today is how sinister that adversary is, that false self can be. And I've used the words subtle and clever and insidious before, but now I'm using the word sinister, which to me at least is even more severe than insidious. Because sinister connotes an even more acute level of evil than even cleverness and subtlety and insidiousness. That the false self is downright sinister. And to help illustrate that, I have behind me that famous scene from the Bible of Jesus ejecting the moneylenders and the livestock traders from the temple. And it's a famous scene from the New Testament, and some might say it's even an infamous chapter in the life of Jesus, because it appears to be the only time that Jesus well and truly expresses anger. Now, people call it righteous anger, and that the fact that he's overturning tables and he's right, like it's one of the very rare displays of violence on the part of Jesus in the life of Jesus. And I would argue that that episode, in that episode, Jesus is cleansing the house of God, the temple, of what should never have been in there. The temple was being exploited by entities, individuals, whose sole purpose for being there was material gain. And they were exploiting the status of the temple, its presence, its location, and its importance to the Israelites, certainly. And they were exploiting it for their own gain. And there's a cleverness about that. And there's a subtlety and an insidiousness about that, about the exploitation of the temple in order to benefit from, let's say, the branding of the temple, what the temple represents, and the forces, the energies that the temple embodies, and the exploitation of that in order for material gain, empirical gain, worldly gain. This is why the story, true though it may be, is also a powerful allegory and a powerful symbol of the work that we must do to eradicate our temple of the entities that are using it and exploiting it for their own material worldly gain. So the lust inside of us that exploits our physicality, our physical body, obviously, clearly, in order for their mechanical gain, to siphon our sexual energy, to make us spill our sexual force. And it's, whether it's gluttony or laziness or pride or any number of egos that are in our body and using our body, using our temple, and exploiting that vehicle, that vessel, that temple, and using it for their fleeting, mechanical, worldly desires, which they present to us as I, me, myself, and I, so that there are our desires. That's why every ego always presents itself as an I. I want this, I don't want that. So the Christ, the innermost intimate Christ, works to eradicate the moneylenders and the livestock traders from our temple. And we've covered this many times in many ways. But the irony is that the moneylenders and the livestock traders in the temple were not Jesus's greatest adversaries. Not by a long shot. They were obviously exploiting the temple, and they didn't belong in the temple, and they had to be cleansed. They had to be eradicated from the temple, which Jesus did. But that's not what gave Jesus the most trouble. They were relatively easy to get rid of. It was like, I don't know, chasing rats out of a kitchen with a broom. That's basically, I mean, when you read that episode from the New Testament, that's basically what it's like. It's like Jesus chasing a bunch of rodents out of the pantry with a broom. Yeah, he had to resort to some physical violence, but it's not like the moneylenders and the livestock traders put up much of a fight. There was a ferocity that only a representative of the Christ brings to the table that flipped those tables. People want to call it righteous anger. They want to give it a whole bunch of different names, but the fact of the matter is that the light of Christ is fierce. There's a ferocity to it. There's an intensity behind it that no amount of anger or rage can match. And if you question this, if you doubt this, just look at the sun and then look at the moon and recognize that the moon is reflecting the same sunlight. But even a full moon can't begin to reflect light with the same intensity and ferocity that the sun shines with. So anyone who says that Jesus was angry in rage and righteous anger and all this nonsense, they have no direct conscious experience of the Christ. They think that Jesus was ejecting those people from the temple using lunar forces, that the light of Christ was being filtered through mechanical processes. No. The direct ferocity and intensity of the Christic light coming through him in those moments were what? 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more terrifying to those moneylenders and livestock traders, because it's nothing they had ever seen before. All they were familiar with were the lunar forces, the reflected light of the moon. They had never seen the sun enter into their lives, commanding them to rid this sacred space of their defilement. So they were not much of a challenge. That was a day's work for Jesus. And in the grand scheme of things, that puts into context what so many have trouble with already, but what really for a bodhisattva is it's almost like child's play. And that's eradicating these lower ranking egos. That, yeah, they might be clever, they might be insidious, they might be many things, but to someone who is operating from the level of their innermost intimate Christ, it's they're a nuisance. They're a nuisance, and they need to be eradicated. We need to cleanse our temple of them. Absolutely. Right? But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm here to talk to you about who really gave Jesus a hard time. This scene behind us, for all of its infamy, was easy for Jesus. Do you know who he couldn't eradicate from the temple? The Pharisees. Now, who were the Pharisees? The Pharisees were, for lack of a better word, the Jewish authority at the time. They were the ones who held the law. They were the keepers of the law, the interpreters of the law, and the adjudicators of the law. They were the judges of the law of Moses, and the laws of Abraham, and everything that had been written down in the Torah and the Talmud. And the Pharisees were the keepers of the Jewish faith and the Jewish law. They were the highest authority. They were the Jewish authority. And many of them, I guess I can't say all of them, but many of them were also hypocrites. They were corrupt. They were schemers. They were like most politicians today. They were like most people who become accustomed to wielding power, to being in a position of authority, to holding a position that afforded them the right to judge and condemn others, while holding themselves to an entirely different standard. These were the interpreters of Scripture, the interpreters of the law, and again, the adjudicators. They were the prosecutors, and they were the judges. And they saw Jesus as an absolute threat to their authority, to their power, to the hold that they had over the Jewish people, over the Jewish nation. And they, at every turn, they spoke out against Jesus, and they would outlaw him and prevent him from speaking, certainly in the temples or in the other spiritual places within town. So that's why Jesus, very often, he had to go and he had to give his sermons on the outskirts of settlements, and he had to, out in the countryside, or right from the Mount of Olives, and this and that, right? He was not allowed, because he was considered to be a radical, and he was a troublemaker, and he was a threat, and he was also a threat to the Roman authority, certainly. But if you recall, at his trial, it was Pilate said openly, he said, I don't see a reason why this man deserves crucifixion. It was Caiaphas and the other Pharisees who demanded crucifixion from the Romans. They demanded that Jesus be put to death. It was the Pharisees who were pretending to be God's representatives on earth that gave Jesus the most trouble. And it was the Pharisees who were pretending to be the heralds and the prophets and the keepers of the knowledge of the one true Messiah that stood in the way of the actual Messiah. That to this day, the Jews don't recognize that Jesus is the Messiah. To this day, they don't recognize that. It was the Pharisees that were the most sinister. And there was only one way that Jesus was going to defeat them. Only one way. And that was to allow himself to be betrayed and to allow himself to undergo all of the suffering and the sinister framing of him, the sinister painting of him as the devil incarnate, as a heretic, as not just a rabble rouser and a troublemaker, but a bona fide threat to all of Israel, a threat to Judaism itself, and to undertake the crucifixion, to take up his cross, in other words, and to die. It's the only way that the Pharisee can be defeated. This past week, I was made hyper aware of my Pharisee. I became hyper aware of how I was pretending to be God's representative on earth. And that the true work of my innermost intimate Christ was deemed in my eyes to be an obstacle, a threat. This is something that anyone walking the path of the razor's edge, anyone walking the path of the Bodhisattva, must at some point face. The sinister reality that the adversary tries to take control and tries to take ownership of the work, the word. Now, how did I come to this realization? Well, do you think it's possible for one's innermost being to be depressed, to fall into depression? I know what's responsible for my depression, just as I know what's responsible when I have an epileptic seizure. Just as I know what the nature, the metaphysical nature of depression is, which is deep-seated subconscious rage, anger. And I know that that rage is spawned by fear, the desire to be in control. So when things don't work out, when outcomes are not how we had wanted them to be, how we had planned them to be, how we had tried to control and manipulate circumstances or in order to be able to produce, when something gets in the way of that, right? Our desire for control or our fear of certain outcomes becomes anger, very quickly turns into anger. And we know that even from Star Wars, we know that from The Empire Strikes Back, right? That fear leads to anger. And all you have to do is look at a mama bear protecting her cubs. She's afraid for the life of her cubs. Well, how quickly does that fear for her cubs' lives instantly turn into a rage, right? A mama bear rage that there's few examples of rage in nature that can match that of a mama bear defending her cubs. And when I say I fell into depression, when that I fell so hard, so fast, so steep and so deep, and it was only in the pit of that despair. And you know that, I don't do drugs. I don't, I have few vices left in that category, but one of them is food, and particularly, things like ice cream and, you know what I mean? Sugary, fatty, sugary, I don't need to spell it out for you. Junk food. And I binged on ice cream like you wouldn't believe. And it was in the pit of that despair and misery and wallowing in that self-pity and how that I realized how the demon, the adversary, had gotten its claws into the whole human upgrade challenge mission, and that everything that had been revealed to me as, things coming into alignment, and it was like that the adversary had taken all of that and made it its own, so that when the obstacle came, it was the adversary that reacted. And it reacted in such a way that I'm, it's you feel ashamed looking back, because the obstacle in the moment was to serve my family and to serve my guests and to just be selfless. In other words, to do the work of the innermost intimate Christ in the moment, to serve those immediately around me. And the bigger picture, the bigger enterprise, the bigger mission, well, listen, if it's waited 52 years, it can wait 2 more weeks. But that's not the way the adversary saw it. That's not the way that I saw it. I saw these people coming in and throwing a monkey wrench in the works and getting in the way of my work, my mission, my purpose, my life's work, which is so big and so important and so crucial. And I've been waiting so long, and right? So it's like things got flipped upside down. And the lower part was in control and was driving that, bursting out of the gate. It was the adversary, it was the false self holding the reins. What does that mean? It means somebody was taking a back seat. And when the opportunity in the moment required to be selfless, well, my innermost was more than happy to oblige. But the adversary, in my case, the demon, was raging. And it was raging where, not out in the open, but deep down. And it was draining me of all kinds of energy, and eventually I just imploded. It was just hollowing me out from the inside. That's my own Pharisee giving my innermost intimate Christ hell. The part of me that's pretending to be the representative of Christ versus the actual innermost intimate Christ. And there's only one way that the innermost Christ can defeat the Pharisees, as I said. We'll get into that more in a minute. Tiffany says, is it possible for the innermost to become depressed? My intuition says no. To me, it's something else, although I'll give that some consideration. Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Tiffany. The innermost can't be depressed. And I hope I made that clear over the last few minutes. It was not my innermost that was depressed. My innermost was happy. My innermost was full of love and selflessness toward my guests and was happily fulfilling all of my obligations and responsibilities as a member of this family, and all that entails in this given circumstance. It was my Pharisee that was raging in the subconscious mind that is the cause of the depression. Because again, the moment I received all the information that I did and began the work on this human upgrade challenge, the possibilities materialized, right? The opportunities that, let's face it, let's be honest, represent some of those possibilities and opportunities represent what can only be described as success. Reaching larger numbers of people, attracting individuals of significant means and resources and influence, and setting into motion the machinations that need to take place in the world in order to be able to fulfill the work that I'm here to do that is of an otherworldly nature. But we have to be practical, right? We cannot build what we need to build here without resources to build it. And we cannot do what we need to do here without the cooperation and participation of others. And there is so much noise and so much everything else, right? So in other words, and I've been waiting for 50 years, and when you get an indication that, okay, your waiting is almost over, things are coming into alignment, there's a path now for you to take. This is what is going to get you there in the final stretch towards what is really just the beginning. But right there in that moment where it was like the rubber is finally about to meet the road, who's there to slip in between, to get itself all tangled up in all of that and take the reins and try to make it its own? It's me, the false self, the I. It's my mission. It's my life's work. I have to make it work. I'm the one who does it. I, me. I'm Christ's representative in the world. I know the word. I interpret the word. I spread the word, and I adjudicate its meaning. Well, what the hell is that if not a Pharisee? That is a Pharisee. The arch enemy of the Christ. Now the question we all must ask ourselves is, do we know our inner Pharisee? Jennifer says, I appreciate you sharing this today. For 8 months, I have been working 10 to 12 hours each day and have been extremely depressed and spending all time indoors. I had a wake-up call Friday. A new beginning is in the works for me. I'm glad to hear it, Jennifer. I'm glad to hear it. It's this is a time for new beginnings. Of course, last Friday was Good Friday. Last Sunday was Easter. And this is the time for new beginnings, but those new beginnings must involve death. This is I think ultimately why Nobody likes to talk about this. Nobody really wants to understand how sinister the false self is. Because the ultimate implication is no, but you need yourself. You can't, you need your ego. You need your ego. You can't eliminate your egos because, and all of these rationalizations and validations. Why? Because the false self doesn't want to die. The Pharisees are terrified of the innermost intimate Christ. The Pharisees are terrified of the Christ. So is our Pharisee. So is my Pharisee. He's so desperate to get in between. He's so desperate to get his hands on what doesn't belong to him. He's so desperate to get his hands on what belongs to and what can only belong to Attlas. And more specifically, Attlas Alux. But the Pharisee wants to be in control. The Pharisee wants to interpret the law and adjudicate the law and be the only one worthy of spreading the word. The Pharisee wants to preserve his position as the representative of Christ, the representative of God in the world, the master of the temple. Well, it's the Pharisees that let the money lenders and the livestock traders into the temple in the first place. That was the Pharisees who allowed that to happen. And you see, this is the dichotomy, the relationship between the scene behind me and the reality of the situation I'm describing, between the false self and the money lenders. Because the false self profits from the money lenders being in the temple. But the false self, the Pharisees, do not profit by Jesus being in the temple or by Jesus preaching in the streets. So the Pharisees have to rid the land of Israel of Christ so that they can go right on allowing the moneylenders and the livestock traders to continue on exploiting the temple, just as the Pharisees exploit their privileged position as the official keepers, interpreters, transmitters, and adjudicators of the law and the word. Because like it or lump it, this is a flesh and blood person in front of you speaking these words to you. And like it or lump it, when I look in the mirror, there is still, right, an I that is overseeing that process of formulating these words that I'm speaking to you. And when I type those words down and publish them in a book or write the script for a explainer video, you see there's still an I here. And that I desperately wants to get in the way and hold on to its position as the keeper, conveyor, communicator, and adjudicator of the word and the law. And so, #human upgrade challenge, great, that's mine. That's my work. I got to do that and I got to get it done. And people are counting on me and I can't let them down. Boy, Do those not sound like good intentions? Does that not seem like someone who's like throwing themselves into God's work and giving all of themselves to this mission and saying, "Oh, I can't let people down, and people are going to be counting on me, and I got to do this every single week, and da 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 and this and that, right?" And pushing and we burst out of the gate, and we're going down the first stretch into the first corner, and I got to keep my pace up, and I got to keep doing. I can't let God down. I can't let others down. This is my work. This was given to me. I'm being woken up at 4 a.m. every morning, right? All sounds good. All seems good. Yeah, that's how sinister this all is. Forget about clever, subtle, and insidious. Now we're on the level of the Pharisee. Now we're talking about sinister. Because there is absolutely nothing the demon relishes more than pretending to be a god. Playing the part of an angel, of a prophet, of a master, of a guru. You know this. You know this not just intuitively, you know this from your experience in literature, in film, in mythology and scripture of all kinds, but you also know it from your own experience. You know it from life. That the greatest villains, the most sinister and evil of individuals who are in the public eye always put themselves up as some kind of a savior. Either a nationalist savior or a spiritual icon or spiritual guru or religious icon, i.e., pastor, evangelical evangelist, right? Or it doesn't matter. They're con men. They put up a front, and that front is always irresistible to whomever it is that they're trying to hypnotize and win over. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about rock stars, or if you're talking about politicians, or again the evangelical pastor, or the self-help guru, or the celebrity scientist. It doesn't matter. These are false selves. These are Pharisees that are presenting they are playing a role, and they can be so damn convincing. It's beyond subtle and clever and insidious. The sinister depths to which they will go in order to present themselves as the most resplendent, trustworthy, pure, angelical, beyond reproach. and what's happening in the background in order for them to be able to present themselves is so diabolically sinister. It's what makes them so dangerous and what makes them so irresistible. And if we think that we're so spiritual and we're so this and we're so that, and we fail to recognize that element inside of us, then we're in for a rude awakening, like I was this week. Because I can sit here week after week speaking to you, expounding this and expounding that and sharing this and sharing that. And then 10 days of my space being, quote, invaded by others, and my routine and my life and my work being obstructed, and I collapse like a house of cards. I cave in. How the hell am I going to handle what's coming down the road? If I can't even handle 10 days of disruption in my life. You realize how humbling an experience this has been? Because I was allowing the demon, my inner Pharisee, to rule and to co-opt and to take advantage and exploit what it has no business being a part of. So the next time you're interrupted, your meditation is interrupted by the dog or the cat or the telephone, and you feel frustrated and you feel angry because your precious meditation time was interrupted, you got to ask yourself, who's getting upset? When you consider why do you even do spiritual practices? Why are you even on the path? And when you say, well, because I want this and I want to know myself, or I want to be awakened, or I want to be enlightened, I want to help others, right? Who is the I in that statement? Because I can tell you that I don't, take 2 or 3 hours out of my Sundays every Sunday to do this, because I thought it was all about me. And it's not all about me, but there's something in me that was making it all about itself. And I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware that I wasn't aware of my Pharisee. But now I'm so acutely aware of it. And I also know that what needs to take place in order for my innermost intimate Christ to well and truly defeat that Pharisee. I know now what it's going to take. And nothing short of that will do. Just as Jesus knew. Just as Jesus easily swept the temple clean of the moneylenders and the livestock traders, but he couldn't do the same thing with the Pharisees. No. Tiffany says, can you expand, if time allows, what can happen to the psyche when we are others after a long duration, of time being alone? Anti-socialism seems to be a thing, and awkwardness seems to set in. And I think she's following up here. Temperament seems to be challenged until we get into a groove. I'm just curious. She goes, when we are around others. When we are around others. Oh, okay. So can you expand, if time allows, what can happen to the psyche when we are around others after a long duration of time being alone? Okay. Anti-socialism, and then temperament seems to be challenged until we get into a groove. Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, Tiffany, when you spend a great deal of time alone, isolated, and you called it antisocial, but you don't have to be antisocial, just in isolation, just keeping to yourself. And then you are suddenly thrust into a situation where you have to deal with others, and you haven't been dealing with others for quite some time. It is like any circumstance where you've become accustomed or you've conditioned yourself to a certain set of circumstances, and then suddenly that conditioning is beset by a new set of circumstances that to some degree bring with them novelty, which you have grown unaccustomed to. So let me use an analogy, crude analogy perhaps. If you stop exercising and you go 6 months without exercising, and then all of a sudden one day you're on your way to the train station and or the bus stop or whatever it is, and you realize you're running late, or you see the bus pulling in or the train starting to pull away, and you make a mad dash to catch the bus or to catch the train. All of a sudden, you're asking your body to perform a sudden and extreme bout of physical exertion when you've been neglecting exercise for 6 months. Now, what happens physically to you under those circumstances? Well, right? It's obvious. It's a tremendous amount of stress put on the body all at once that it's not been prepared for. It's been conditioned to be in a state of low energy, low activity, and it has adjusted itself to being in that state, a sedentary state. And then all of a sudden, from that sedentary state, you're asking it to go from there to up here, to this hyper stressful hyper exertion of physical energy, of physical activity. But its baseline is down here after 6 months of sedentary inactivity. So there's this huge gap. And in trying in your body trying to get from here up to here in that sudden, very short period of time, that's a very stressful situation. And your body will produce all kinds of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and all kinds of other hormones in a desperate attempt to fulfill the demands of them making a mad dash, the sprint to catch the bus or to catch the train or to catch the plane, as another example, if anybody's ever found themselves in that situation. So when you ask the question, what happens in the psyche when you're suddenly thrown into a vibrant, active social event after months of isolation and antisocial behavior, something very, very, very similar happens. Only not physically, but psychologically. But the same stress is there, the same cortisol gets released, right? The heart rate might be going 1,000 miles a minute, right? Like it's very similar. It's very similar. Like physiologically, you might experience the same thing. Panic breaths. You might even have a panic attack. You haven't spoken to anybody. You haven't been in, public places except for maybe, I don't know, go to the grocery store or pick up go and do laundry or whatever, or right? So you haven't really been in any real social settings. You've been isolating. And all of a sudden you're thrown into, I don't know, a family gathering, a potluck dinner, some social event, Christmas party at work, or God only knows what it is. But all of a sudden you're surrounded by people and they're all beaming and smiling and coming up to you and wanting to shake your hand and, oh, tell me about this and tell me about it and how have you been? I haven't seen you. And it could be complete, total information overload, in the same way that your physical body is experiencing a complete physical overload as you're trying to make a mad dash for the train after 6 months of inactivity. Same thing. But now it's the social algorithms and your social graces, those muscles, those psychological, if you want to be crude about it, the neural pathways, right? Around that, like just the sensory overload and the, people coming at you from all directions and you being surrounded by people. Because there's such a thing, for example, as it's called agoraphobia, which is the fear of wide open spaces. Now that fear of wide open spaces is precisely the type of, it's a version of what you're talking about. It's somebody whose psyche is accustomed to very isolated and smaller, contained, confined spaces. And their senses and their psychology is attuned and accustomed to the limits afforded by confined spaces. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in Times Square, or I don't know, or some other public space, like or some festival or carnival or Woodstock or something. It's wide open spaces with maybe surrounded by tens of thousands of people, and now they completely freak out. If you've ever had an indoor cat that, for whatever reason, finds itself outside for the first time, and if you've ever seen an indoor cat completely freak out when they leave the confines of their house for the first time, maybe somebody brought their dog over and the dog chased them out the front door or something like that, and all of a sudden when the cat realizes it's outside, it completely freezes and it starts completely freaking out because it's never experienced this before. It's so foreign. It's so completely the opposite of what it's used to. And a similar thing happens for people who suffer from not agoraphobia, but the fear of confined spaces, which is Oh gosh, it's not coming to me. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So the fear of the fear of confined space, it's just the opposite. There are some people that need the space. Their psyche and everything, they need the wide open space. Claustrophobia, that's what it is. You put them in an elevator and they start freaking out. Why? They feel like they're suffocating. Okay, so all of these, I'm really talking around or sort of trying to comprehensively flesh out the picture for you, that a lot of this has to do with psychological conditioning and the conditions in which we, quote, naturally find ourselves comfortable in, what we have grown accustomed to, or have we become conditioned through our own choice or through circumstances of life, and then life thrusts us into the opposite condition, and then we have to try to adapt instantly to the new condition. And if the conditions are that diametrically opposed, then the adaptation process, it's there, it's possible, but it is extreme. Desperate times call for desperate measures. The body and the mind are both incredibly plastic. We are made for change. We are made to adapt. It's true. We really are. But at the same time, we're creatures of habit. This is the great paradox of the human condition, is that our mechanical self is really, because of the law of conservation of energy, our mechanical nature likes everything staying the same, right? We like routine, we like what we like the predictability, we like, right? So these are, and we like what we like, and we like what makes us comfortable and what we're familiar with. Our divine nature prefers novelty over predictability and routine, right? There's an aspect of us which becomes rather bored with routine, because we know that routine leads to stagnation and ultimately entropy. And so there are different facets and aspects to that. But mechanical nature has built into it, as part of its survival mechanism, the capacity to adapt very rapidly to changing circumstances. That's why, believe it or not, that's why we gain weight so incredibly quickly, and we lose weight relatively quickly. It is possible to lose weight just as quickly as you gained it, although, again, it comes with these drastic side effects, right? It's not particularly healthy. And that's why it's much better to have a well-rounded psychological environment, a much well-rounded, well-balanced psychological lifestyle. Just as we would say it's better to have a well-rounded, well-balanced diet, it's better to have a well-rounded, well-balanced lifestyle of exercise, of activities, a healthy work-life balance, right? It's the middle way, in other words. Anytime you push yourself to any extreme, you are setting yourself up for the kind of radical, extreme, rapid adaptation required to adjust to the to exposure to the opposite circumstance. I hope that helps answer the question. I've done my best to give you a really robust and voluptuous holistic response to that. But the reason why I gave you the response that I did is because your question, while it was focused on the psyche, I want to emphasize that there is nothing particularly unique about the psyche that makes it so difficult psychologically. That this is what we are describing is an archetypal pattern that repeats throughout all aspects of our lives. As I said, like if for example, if you've been on a vegan diet for 6 months, don't run out and order yourself a 32-ounce porterhouse steak, right? You're not going to do well. Or if you've been on a carnivore diet for 6 months, don't go out and suddenly change to a vegan diet overnight. You're not going to do well. Your body can adapt rapidly, and it will. You won't die, right? You won't die of starvation. But boy, oh boy, will you suffer gastrointestinal problems for the first few days while your body is desperately trying to adjust to that new diet, especially considering that all the probiotics in your gut over a 6-month period have completely shifted to either the vegan or the carnivore diet, depending on which one you've been on, right? So again, it doesn't matter. You can look at every single conceivable aspect of the human condition in this way, right? Just like even something as simple as language. If you've lived in an English-speaking country all your life, then suddenly move to China, cold turkey, and you arrive on the shores of China and you say, okay, I'm here now. Well, guess what? You're going to have to learn Mandarin or Cantonese, right? Very, very, very quickly. Well, how much stress and pressure is that going to put on your mental faculties and physically and emotionally as you try to navigate your way in a country that doesn't speak your language, right? Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is the same archetype applies. That adaptability is there, but gradual change is preferable to that acute, sudden change. And that's why people suffer from shell shock, what they now call PTSD. It's the same thing, right? That's someone who's yeah, they might have gone through basic training and everything else, but they've never experienced war. And it's not until they experience that, and yes, the body does make adaptations, but the adaptations are so violent and so radical, so extreme, that they cause permanent or semi-permanent side effects that continue to haunt that person for decades afterwards, if they don't know how to properly work themselves through the treatment in the aftermath of shell shock, what people call PTSD. So again, I hope I answered that question. So coming back to what I was mentioning earlier, I honestly don't think we need to belabor the point necessarily, other than you've heard me talk about mystic pride before, where the ego takes credit for spiritual advancement. And people who they like to, for example, brag about how spiritual they are, or the powers that they have, and we know that pride will boast about philanthropy, for example. and how giving we are, and how much we give of ourselves, etc., etc. And yes, mystic pride is very clever and subtle and insidious. But humility can lead one down the path of surrender. And we can feel ourselves having completely surrendered, and yet still fall into the trap that I fell into this past week. Even in our humility. And yes, there's something to be said for the pride which feeds off of humility. And I think there's that famous story that Master Samael talks about. I think it was Aristotle. I think the philosopher's name was Epistopus. I may have got that name wrong, but it's Aristotle and the other philosophers are going through Athens, and there's Epistopus who always wore these ragged cloaks filled with holes that were like years old, and he did that because he felt himself to be a humble man, and that he didn't require the fineries of a new cloak or whatever. And I think it was Aristotle who says, Epistopus, we see your pride through the holes in your cloak. And the implication there is that wearing one's humility on one's sleeve is a form of pride. And so there's that aspect of it. But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to when you are in humility, and that humility has allowed you to surrender, and in that surrender, something gets into that surrender and that service and takes it so seriously and makes it a matter of life and death for itself. And therefore, it must succeed. And in order that it succeed, it must take control of the act of surrender. So consider that just for a moment, Kundalini King. Okay? This is what I'm talking. This is what I've been talking about. He says it's a matter of life and death. What a perfect time to come in this afternoon. Yeah, but here's the rub. Here's the rub. When surrender, it's not so simple. Because I thought that I had surrendered. Just like the Pharisees thought that they had surrendered. And yet, when Jesus showed up, Jesus was a threat to the Pharisees, who thought that they had surrendered. But Jesus was a threat to the Pharisees because they were the ones who, according to Jewish law, were entitled. They were the keepers of the law, of the word, and they were the adjudicators of the law. They were the ones in command and control of the teachings of God, which they had all taken oaths to. They had all taken oaths to dedicate and devote their life to God. They had all surrendered their lives to do the work of God and to be God's representatives on earth. So they had, in their own minds, surrendered. But they were very clearly the ones in control of that surrender, that surrendering process. And Kundalini King says, I just finished journaling on surrender, and he says, thy will, not mine, be done. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But I also was doing God's will, not mine, when God's will was interrupted. And I was being kept from doing God's will as it was revealed to me. And these obstacles had now came and prevented me from doing God's will. It wasn't my will, it was God's will. And yet, there was something inside of me in the wake of that obstacles, the wake of the obstacles that were preventing me from doing God's will, caused me to fall into a fit of depression. Well, that wasn't my innermost intimate Christ that fell into depression. It was the demon that had attached itself to doing God's will. It was the Pharisee. Kundalini King says, it's like grieving. You know, I see where you're coming from, because what is grieving? Exactly. You love someone, and you're right to love them, but now they're gone, or they've died, or they're sick, or some tragedy's befallen them, and all of a sudden you fall apart, right? Well, that doesn't seem like love. God would never fall apart like that. So what the hell is falling apart like that? Clearly, it's attachments, it's identifications. It's the false selves clinging onto and grafting itself onto that love. And as the difficulty, whether it's the loss of the loved one or the tragedy befallen the loved one, so they exploit that. They use that as an opportunity to grieve, as all parasites do. And parasites, the more powerful, the more vital, the more alive the host, the more parasites it will attract, the more attractive that is to a parasite. And nothing can be more full of energy and vitality and power than love or God's will, God's work. So of course the adversary has got to get in there. But my point here is that the adversary is going to be a Pharisee. It's not just any run-of-the-mill ego. Those are the egos that Jesus, chased out of the temple, right? Like you're like chasing rats out of the kitchen with a broom. Jesus couldn't chase the Pharisees out of the temple. That's the point that I'm making, is that we have to become aware and conscious of our Pharisees. those egos that are not so easily overcome, and those are the egos that are going to attach themselves like the parasitic entities that they are. They're going to try to get into all the little crevices and all the cracks between us and God, between the love in our hearts and the devotion and the true humility and surrender and all of the goodness and virtue that comes along with that emanates from our innermost intimate Christ. It's going to be the eyes, the self, the false self, that's going to pretend to be the representative of, and the one who's upholding, and the one who's devoted, and the one who's right. Just like grief, as Kundalini says here, grief pretends to be the one who cares. But your soul is the one who truly cares. Your soul doesn't grieve. So what grieves? And yet people will tell you, well, if you're not grieving, you must not have really cared, which is ridiculous. That's how clever and insidious and sinister the adversary is, because that's what we're talking about here. This is where demons are at their worst, when they're masquerading and pretending to be representatives of God. Demons are at their worst when they're pretending to be angels, and they do it all the time. All the time. It's their favorite game. And we have such entities within us. And it's important for us to be aware of them and their machinations and how they go about hijacking our deepest longings of the soul and our most profound purposes in life, and our love that should be unconditional, but they're the ones that are the conditions that come in and attach themselves to what should be unconditional, and turns unconditional love into conditional love. They are the aspects of the adversary, the false self, that subject the objective light within that wants to shine through us into the world, free and unobstructed and unfiltered, unconditioned. And they're the elements that get in the way. So in my case, that the human upgrade challenge, yeah, it needs to happen and so on, but it will happen as it needs to. It doesn't, but something in me decided that no, it needs to happen every week on the week. It needs to happen this way. It needs to unfold this way. And so when something got in the way of that, the aspect of me, my Pharisee, that wanted to be in control of the word and wanted to be in control of the law and wanted to act out the role of God's representative, started freaking out. Meanwhile, the innermost intimate Christ was just rolling with the obstacle, rolling with the, okay, so fine. So no, we got to do this instead. We got to serve here. We got to serve our family instead. All that other thing can wait. If it's waited 50 years, it can wait another 2 weeks. But the Pharisee, who's been waiting 50 years with bated breath, chomping at the bit, and had blasted out of the gate, didn't want to wait another 2 weeks. No, it took it as an insult. It took it personally. We have to be aware of this, that this is how sinister the false self, our egos, can be. That even our highest calling can become fodder for them to exploit. And that's the true meaning of why I put this image up behind me for today's live stream. It's who you don't see in this painting that I'm talking about. The ones who actually let the money lenders and the livestock traders into the temple in the first place, and the ones who are skimming off the top of every trade that goes on in that temple. Who do you think that was? If not the Pharisees themselves, the Jewish authority that gave Jesus, the innermost intimate Christ, the most trouble. The ones who pretend to be God's representative on earth, who block and persecute and slander the actual true representative of God on earth, the innermost intimate Christ. We all have our inner Pharisee, our Pharisees, and it's they're not just those run-of-the-mill egos that Jesus chases out of the temple. Jesus couldn't chase the Pharisees out of the temple. There's only one way that we can overcome our Pharisees, and that way is psychological death. They have to die. We have to die psychologically. And that is a slow and arduous process. It is a process of comprehension. It is a difficult and painful process because we don't want to die. But at the end of the day, that is the only way that the Christ well and truly is born, the Son of God and the Son of Man. And that is that unless a man be born of the waters and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And that brings up the whole topic of sexual alchemy, the creation of the solar bodies, of creating a temple that is worthy to receive the Christ, not a temple of stone, but a temple of gold. Or rather, not a temple of lead, but a temple of gold. Not a vessel of lead, but one of gold. And that is the transmutation that the philosophical stone was able to perform under the precepts of alchemy, the transmutation of lead into gold. So, I'm happy to report that after I came to these comprehensions and decided that this would be today's topic, much of my depression evaporated. It let up again because I comprehended what was actually going on and what had actually taken place. I learned the lesson that I needed to learn, and I felt it was very important for me to share that lesson with you, because I really do feel that it's not given enough emphasis on the spiritual journey. People are too, including myself, we are too easily duped into believing that, oh, we're on the spiritual path, and we're so we so easily fall into a place of complacency because the natural inclination of our mechanical self is that of adaptation and mimicry, because that's all it can do. Any machine can do is draw on a power source and replicate. In other words, repeat that which it was designed to do. It draws power and it does what it does. And the Pharisee, its natural tendency is to draw power and light and project itself via that power and light as the arbiter and the representative of the light. And remember that. Remember your inner Pharisee. Observe it. And then ask yourself, is this really the way? And comprehend the New Testament, the life of Jesus, and his struggles with the Pharisees in the light of all that we've talked about. Kundalini King says, I will be listening. Gonna do a replay of today's stream later. I appreciate you, Attlas. I'm learning from you and grateful for this sacred space you have created. Well, thank you, Kundalini King. It's my privilege and my pleasure to be here. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? I don't see any particular reason why we have to drag this out today. Unless you have specific questions you'd like me to answer. I think 2 hours it's a beautiful day where I am anyway. Hopefully it's a beautiful day where you are. Let's get outside and enjoy the rest of today. I feel like I've conveyed what I needed to convey and share about, the learning that I experienced this past week. And in the future, I will take this as a very important lesson moving forward, and that it's surrender is how you surrender is at least as important as why and to whom. Because who is surrendering and how are they surrendering? Unconditionally? Conditionally? Or is there some sinister subplot going on that we don't know about? Well, after my rude awakening this week, I've discovered the sinister subplot. So now it's going to be an ongoing process of being very watchful and making sure that I continue this process of continually getting myself out of the way of myself. In that sense, Atlas information is really a process of Attila disformation, dissolution, right? Breaking apart, breaking down the former so that the latter can come into being. Kundalini King says, never give up, but always know when to surrender. Well, in this particular case, well, again, there's subtleties involved here. There's and it's not just, again, it's not just subtle, it's sinister. We cannot afford to be naive. We have to be aware of how sinister the adversary is, our individual shaitan. And remember that the con man, the false guru, the TV evangelist, the self-help guru, the pop music idol, you name it. There are so many different examples. And the fact of the matter is that there's nothing that the Black Lodge enjoys more than masquerading as being a servant of light and being some resplendent angel or prophet or God or guru or what have you. And there are countless books on the shelves of New Age bookstores and occult sections of the library filled with books that were written by so-called channelers, by mediums who were approached in the astral plane by some resplendent being of light, telling them, I have chosen you to be my channel, and I want you to deliver my message to humanity. All you must do is allow me to possess you, so that through automatic writing, without any volition of your own, I will write all that humanity needs to know, and through you as my medium, as my channeler. The White Lodge does not do that. Possession is a crime. Possession is a violation of free will. No member of the White Lodge will commit that spiritual crime. No member of the White Lodge will violate the law of free will. Only demons do that. And they love doing that. But the only way they can do that is by presenting themselves to be, masters or prophets or angels or whatever. And these naive people traveling in the astral plane, not knowing how to differentiate a demon from an angel because they don't know the test, to ask the entity in the astral plane about white tantra. Please, with all humility, I beg of you, instruct me on the correct practice of tantra. A member of the White Lodge will always give you the answer that it's white tantra you must practice, and a member of the Black Lodge will always tell you to practice black tantra, will always tell you to use the orgasm and harness the power of the orgasm. So if an angel tells you to harness the power of the orgasm, you know that you're dealing with a demon who's pretending to be an angel. And it's the only way you can know. People, I have told this to people in the past, is, I can tell the difference between a demon and an angel. Oh, really? Can you? How? Oh, well, I can tell. I would use my intuition, blah, 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 blah. And they're fooling themselves. That answer is the answer of a Pharisee, their own inner Pharisee. That's convinced them that they are, because they are some vehicle, vessel, representative of God or whatever. They're already a god already if they're in the New Age. That's what they believe. We're gods already, don't you know? So, and that's why so many of the New Age bookstores are filled with books that were channeled from demons, precisely because the people were so easily convinced by those demons. And they all think that they're channeling the work of angels. So that's all well and good for the demons outside of us. But now, right, I'm talking about the demons inside of us. I'm talking about the demons that are us. The demons that are us, who like to think of themselves and play the role of and pretend to be the vessel and the prophet and the messenger and the worker and the servant and the one who has surrendered to. And I've surrendered. Yeah, but how have you surrendered? To whom and what has surrendered? Stay in observation of yourself, because I'm telling you, after this week, it's sinister. The forces within us are not just clever, they're not just subtle, and they're not just insidious. They are downright sinister. And we cannot afford to be naive, and we cannot afford to believe that, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. Okay. Anyone have any questions or comments of any kind? If not, I'll give you a couple minutes, but if not, we'll wrap it up for today. Tiffany says, oh, I would love to attend a live stream discussing the difference of how we know the difference of angels and demons and what we can do to test that. Great reflection today. I just told you. You asked them about Tantra. I don't need to make a live stream about that, because it would be a very short live stream. You ask them about the correct practice of Tantra. An angel can only answer one way. A demon can only answer one way. And the way they answer are the opposite. A demon is not allowed to tell you to practice white Tantra. And an angel would never tell you to practice black Tantra. Simple. There's no member of the White Lodge that's going to encourage you to have the orgasm, and there's no member of the Black Lodge which is going to tell you not to orgasm. That's it. It's that simple. It is the test. It is the only test. It is the only question. And if you ask them anything else, if you try to go about it any other way, that demon can be clever enough, insidious and sinister enough to trick you into believing it's an angel. But if you ask it that question, it cannot give you the right answer. It can't. It can only give you the answer that its programming permits it to give. And in mechanical nature, the energy must flow down and out. It's the law of conservation of energy. Now that's ironic, okay? But what that means is that the law of the conservation of energy means that mechanical nature is always consuming energy. It's a machine. By telling you to preserve your energy, it's depriving itself of what it needs to exist. No machine will do that. No machine can do that. It's incapable of doing that. And Tiffany says, so just go straight for the jugular. Check. Got it. Well, you can be humble about it, right? You be humble about it. Oh, because especially if there's a resplendent being of light standing in front of you, it might very well actually be an angel. So you want to be humble. Oh, great, Master so-and-so, fall to your knees. I beg you, I plead of you with all humility to instruct me on the correct practice of Tantra so that I may not make some grave error in judgment. If it is an angel, he will know exactly why you are asking that. And he'll have no problems answering it. If it's a demon pretending to be an angel, well, you may get some interesting answers. But but in that interesting answer will be hidden that will include the yes, and be sure to harness the power of the orgasm. So, any other questions or comments before we call it a day? So, because I still have family around, probably until Tuesday, I don't know how much work I'm going to be getting done, but even later this week, I'm going to be taking some time to meditate on the whole human upgrade challenge and all the information that I received, because it's possible that I received all of that information just to have this experience and have this lesson, and maybe it was just only for my benefit, right? So I want to go back and be sure that I haven't misjudged and misinterpreted that whole thing. So no human upgrade challenge for this week. Just take the one that you got last week and just extend it. And then we'll see where it's going, or if it's not going anywhere. Tiffany says, have a great week, everyone. Blessings. Thank you, Tiffany. Blessings to you and to everyone as well. Have a wonderful week. I want to thank you for being here. And hopefully I will see you again next week. And until then, as always, inferential peace. Goodbye, everyone.